let me start with our introduction first, and then let me also give people co-host so you all can welcome our audience, whoever has the capability to do that. Okay, we'll get started. Good morning and good evening to our global friends. Welcome to today's guest seminar convened as part of our ongoing commitment to foster a transnational solidarity among women's empowerment advocates. Today's dialogue brings together two organizations whose work exemplifies the dynamic landscape of intersectional feminism and gender advocacy. We're honored to host the founding members from Bonhishikha, a Dhaka-based feminist organization founded in 2010, advocating for women's rights, gender equality, and raising awareness of gender-based violence through innovative art, theater, storytelling, movement building, advocacy programs, and more. The organization's tagline, Unlearn Gender, reflects their commitment to challenging patriarchal norms and promoting gender equity through educational dialogue. In conversation with Bonhishikha, we have United Proud Women staff members joining us today. Oh, I see Tori, Dian, and later on Carlin will also join, and myself included. Up Women is a nonprofit organization whose mission centers on empowering women on gender diversity spectrum with safe, brave, collaborative, and creative spaces to grow as individuals, connect with community members, and organize collective actions. Our discussion today will explore the diverse methodologies and challenges inherent in intersectional feminist practice, particularly examining how these organizations navigate questions of class, language, religion, and state relations within their respective contexts. We will investigate everyday practices of resistance, community collaborations, and shared visions for advancing women's rights and gender diversity across cultural and geographical boundaries. Bonhishikha's innovative approach of using art theater productions based on real stories of local experiences, from their groundbreaking staging of the Vagina Monologue in Bangladesh to their locally focused productions, such as It's a She Thing and Men Don't Talk, offers compelling insights into culturally responsive feminist pedagogy. Meanwhile, Up Women's transnational organizing model provides a framework for understanding women on the gender diversity spectrum to build solidarity across national borders while addressing localized forms of social injustice. This conversation is particularly timely as feminist movements worldwide grapple with questions of intersectionality, inclusivity, and the complex dynamics of organizing across drastically shifting political environments. Through today's exchange, we aim to illuminate strategies for building more just futures for women while honoring the specificities of local contexts and lived experiences. I now invite our distinguished speakers from Bonhishka to introduce themselves first and their organizations, and maybe share a little about your journey of how your feminist engagement began. Tasaffy, do you like to begin first?
Good morning from Bangladesh. I know it's not morning for everybody, but for us, it's just the beginning of the day. I can start a little bit with talking about myself and a bit about Bonhishikha's beginning and how it's been going for us for a while. And then Samina will move on to talking about a bit broader issues that we are working on engaging with right now. So I think the question of feminism or feminist activism always comes with, did you always know you're going to do this? Was this something that you were passionate about? And I always think it's funny to think about when I first considered feminism as something to think of, or whether I call myself a feminist. And it was actually back at university, and this was in 2000, in my first year of university, so 2002. And, at the dining table, we're all having debates around equality and whether feminism is, anti-men, and the general understanding about equality was always to be like, oh, we believe in equality, but we're not a feminist. And that's what you kind of heard or got to know. And it struck me like I didn't really know what feminism was. Like I hadn't really heard about it. It wasn't, part of pop culture as much as maybe it is now, and you didn't see as much information about it. So I decided to go and do my own research and try to understand what then does feminism stand for. And at the end of that night of like, going through whatever I could find, pre-Google days, and I just thought that, oh, this makes sense. Like whatever it's saying here is what I align with. So why wouldn't I call myself a feminist? It doesn't make sense to not then call myself a feminist. So it was a very intentional decision to kind of, I think, few things question what the general narrative was of going equality versus feminism, of doing the research and analyzing it for myself, and then making the intentional decision to call myself a feminist. And even now, I think all those things are what specifically feminism is about. That you don't just automatically listen and take for granted whatever is around you, but have the intention to challenge it, to question it, to understand where it comes from, to get to the roots of it, and then decide for yourself what it is that you align with, or you want to support, or you want to have in your own life or in your own ways of being. And even when I thought of that, it wasn't from a activism space. It was just from the space of recognizing what my own intentions were, what I thought I should have the opportunity for, the choices for, and not just, allow things to be handed to me in terms of this is how it is, this is how it goes, and thus you should follow it. And I think I have to say, like, that does, even as I grew up, and now when I also engage with people I grew up with, people I went to school with, and how my own way of thinking through these things was. And I think some of it is luck. Some of it is luck in the sense that I was lucky to have that base to where I grew up in a family where, my grandmothers were both educated in the sense that they would read, they both knew how to, they had both gone to school. They would talk to us about things they saw on the news, in the newspapers. And I see like people that I went to school with, where for a lot of them, their grandmothers were not from that background. And I think it made much later in life did I realize the difference in this. The difference in that it makes where you come from the place where you are used to seeing women be part of conversations at the table, be part of decision making in its own way. I think this was also one of the questions that Yutzin had brought up to us, like what is elitism? And, often we are considered to be elite feminists being part of a space where, which is not necessarily the grassroots. And I grew up in Dhaka. I am someone from Dhaka. It's also funny to me that I'm often not considered to be Bangladeshi enough because I don't look Bangladeshi enough or I don't walk Bangladeshi enough. And this is a joke I've had with friends oftentimes where I would say like in the airport when I reach Bangladesh, a lot of times like immigration officers and people like that think I'm non-Bangladeshi. And it took me a while. And then I was like, I think it's because I walk straight, like my back is straight and my breasts are out. And you don't often expect that women walk like that. And that is what they think of, because it's not so much about what I'm wearing, or they haven't talked to me yet. They just see me walking and they decide I must not be Bangladeshi. And I think it's all those little things which come together, which is often tagged as elitism. So I have questioned myself in that sense, like what does make it elitism? Because usually, like the actual definition of elite society would be society which is affluent, which has the networks and the social capital, which links them to, decision-making spaces, civil society, which is connected to, say, lobbying and advocacy spaces, or private sector, which also again has a role in how the economy works, how they can kind of push and advocate for their requirements. But I think what also defines elitism in a way, I think, is also recognizing that there's different privileges outside of the bigger social networks. The privilege that I had by knowing that women can be part of conversations and discussions. From a young age, knowing I could, engage in debate and question things while at the dining table with family, with elders sitting there, which I think a lot of people don't grow up with in societies like Asia, East Asia, where you're not necessarily um, encouraged to engage in that. And I have to say, I mean, there were, of course, like, um, you know, things called out in the opposite way as well. So, there's this word we have, which is beado, which is often used to address women when they challenge or question things. There's also there's also a lot of these other ways of, then discouraging and trying to encourage girls and women to sort of follow the norm or try to be softer and nicer and, more palatable in a way. So those kind of things, of course, were there, but I think it's just the ability to know that you don't have to be silent, that you don't have a say. I think that makes a big difference. And I think eventually, so I always say, like, activism always starts in your personal space. And a big part is being able to engage in conversations. It doesn't necessarily always have to lead to big changes. That there isn't major leaps that you will end up making. But I think that intention of looking for a space, being able to open up, ask for things you want, be able to even argue about why you should get what you're asking for. I think that's activism, which starts very young. I think with most of us, especially I think women growing up in Asian societies, I think it becomes a very big norm. And this was also one of the things we would discuss when we would sit with our men's group in Dhaka about these engagements of when do you really start engaging with your family and, have those debates and try to create that space. And often boys, as they grow up, tend to have that privilege of sort of hiding away from family. They tend to be away. They're less surveilled in a way than girls are, which allows them a bit more space to kind of do their own things hidden from their families instead of having to push their families to understand what they're doing. But girls don't have that privilege often. I mean, especially in places like Bangladesh, even if you're going to like someone's house, a friend's house, your mother is probably taking you there. If you're going to like tuitions classes after school, someone is there waiting outside for you. So you don't often have that leverage to kind of sneak away and do a lot of things. I'm not saying that doesn't happen, that definitely happens, but the chances are less. The number of girls who are able to do that is less. I think social media has kind of changed that a bit, which I think also our anti-feminist movements also use similar kind of agenda, saying social media and Facebook and these platforms allow girls so much more leverage and access. Yeah, I think the point being basically that when it comes to being a feminist, that was a very specific intention, whether coming into the movement space, engaging in the movement space, being part of, advocacy spaces as we are now, all of these sort of happened very organically as a step-by-step process for me personally, and also for Bonhishikha, I would say. And I think the beginning of Bonhishikha, as you've seen mentioned, started with the performances, with the vagina monologues, and that was very much something that was intended to be fun, but also interesting, a space that we thought was missing, especially in the urban area where there wasn't, like, of course, you were having like, conversations in your closed circles, families, but actually having spaces which were talking about gender as an issue, norms and stereotypes as things to think about, broader challenges that society was facing. So it felt like a interesting way of, creating a space to break that ice, to have open discussions in public. And once we started doing that, we really realized how much we also liked having the rehearsal spaces, because that really turned out to be like a space of connection, space for a group of women who did not know each other. Like say Samina, who's here, really joined us as one of the volunteers for those performances. That's how we got to know each other. And now it's been, I think, more than 10 years. And we connected in our own way. We realized, very similarities in certain things that we were passionate about, similarities in, very different backgrounds, maybe very different ways that we grew up, but then similarities in how you engage, in how you challenge, in how you evolve. And I think that was really what made those performance spaces matter, that they ended up creating this space of venting, of talking, of connecting, of getting to know others who kind of felt the same way about a lot of these issues. And I think as young feminists, I think a lot of times you grow up feeling very alone and feeling like you're the only one questioning a lot of these things and challenging a lot of these things, and not having that support network around you. It feels like you're, engaging in these conversations at home and then at work, and then on the streets you're walking with like a stern face and ready to, punch anyone who kind of, you know, um, puts their hand in the wrong angle or in the wrong way with intention. Um, and I think so that was kind of really what made it possible for us to sort of start doing newer things. It always came out through conversations and discussions. And as we were doing like the vagina monologues pieces, we would talk about our own experiences. And, we realized how much there were commonalities, regardless of whether you went to an English medium school or you grew up in different parts of Dhaka. A lot of people who joined us also didn't grow up in Dhaka, grew up in other areas of Bangladesh. And there were still similarities of experience. There were similarities in how families had expectations, in those who were married, how marriages had similar expectations, regardless of who you were married to and how educated they were and how open-minded they seemed. And it just allowed a space for these stories to sort of start coming together. So that's where we decided, oh, we could do our own stories. I mean, in a similar modality as the vagina monologues, but it could still talk about how we want to work, what we want to work in, how we are challenging a lot of these things in our own lives. And once we started doing that, it really grew even more. We had more people, much younger people also coming and joining. So there were, also these interaction of seeing differences of how I faced certain things 20 years ago and how someone else is facing something similar, but slightly different again. So what has changed? What has not changed? Um, and then eventually we only decided to actually formalize as an institution 10 years after we started doing all of this. It was very much, again, an intentional step at that point. One of the reasons being a lot of us worked in the development space. I had already started doing consulting in that area, and one thing that really interested me at that point was trying to push a feminist agenda into the development space, because we do have a lot of women's rights work, but it's very much focused only around women's issues. A lot of times, NGOs also don't want to challenge certain norms and perspectives because they feel like that would remove them from the communities. A lot of grassroots organizations fear that if they start pushing certain agendas, they won't have access to communities and spaces. So our intention was really to start thinking about how, like, does this push have to be a very direct push, or can we have different ways of engaging in it? And that has been part of a lot of work in the women's rights area. But oftentimes, with so many NGOs coming up with a lot of like international mandates and donor mandates around what to focus on, how to engage, kind of gets mixed up and forgotten in a lot of ways. It becomes very much about getting the activities done. So that was kind of like a really intentional area of engagement for us to try and, engage in feminism, not just when you're working with communities, but how to bring it within your organization, how that can be a way of thinking, how that becomes a core value of how the organizational culture is, and at the same time, how then you're engaging in these topics wherever you're placed. So that is when we eventually, while we started doing a bit more of that, we started doing workshops with different spaces, including like private sector organizations, university, educational spaces, and with other NGOs and INGOs based in Bangladesh. Then we started actually formalizing and coming together, a lot of us who were already engaged with the performances, engaged with these workshops, came together and formalized into what we are now. And even that for us has been a slow step forward. That was very much an intention that we don't jump in and get a ton of things and start huge, rather let it grow slowly and kind of have that capacity to focus on things that we take on. It's been 5 years. It's been a very interesting up and down roller coaster of trying to figure out how also like official spaces go, how as an organization we want to have our own values and cultures about what a feminist space can look like. And it's been tough, I have to say. I wouldn't say it's just been a smooth sailing road. It's been tough to try to understand what that can be like trying to question what works, what doesn't, and sometimes also realizing that um, just an easy open way doesn't work. Sometimes you need the stronger kind of disciplines in places to get things going and moving. So, trying to being able to balance flexibility and accountability and what works, what doesn't. And I think really the flexibility of shifting. Like sometimes something works for a bit of time and then you have to go back and still change it because something else is a bigger priority at that point. So yeah, I think for us, really like in this decade and a half of being called activists, I think that was also one of the things that we realized we're activists when people start referring to you as an activist, and recognizing that as you sort of engage in the movement space, and the movement space changes so much. And I think we're going to talk about that more as we go forward. But, like in 2010, when we did the vagina monologues, the level of space that we felt secure in to be able to do it. I mean, the first 2 years, it was very much a closed door event. Then we sort of pushed it, brought up, started having shows in different parts of Bangladesh, in different parts of Dhaka. But, also collecting stories from around Bangladesh. We had pieces about really thinking about women and freedom and choice and sexuality. Sexuality in multiple ways, because, as women, you're also not allowed to think about desire and likes and wants. So it was also about just being able to open up space to have these conversations, that there's choice in so many different ways. Being able to understand yourself and question what you are always being told. So really, like, all of that really focused on how do we engage in opening up spaces to have conversations. And I think that is still a focus of what we do. I think even if we are having discussions about advocacy between grassroots organizations and national organizations, it's really about being able to facilitate an open space so people are comfortable talking. I think a lot of times that is the biggest challenge in bringing people together, in kind of opening up spaces of discourse. It's so easy to write off another group that you're not familiar with and just not think about them as people, as someone, who has the same intentions and hopes and wants as you yourself. But rather, we always see this when we are having young people coming into trainings and workshops and not knowing each other, not understanding what they're about. And through that engagement, becoming comfortable to talk about things which they feel, marginalized or moved away from social connection in other spaces, and just being able to open up and talk about those issues. And by the end of it, I always say this, like if you have a lot of different people in one room, and someone or the other will bring up issues that challenge the norm. And that allows that space for conversation. A lot of times people think that we go into spaces and we are the ones who kind of direct and talk about these topics and issues and say, oh no, everyone has to be diverse and everyone has to be open to things. But the real work of facilitation is not being the ones to say it, but rather creating that space for it to come from the room. And that always happens. There will always be, and a lot of times it might also be the most surprising person who brings up the most open-minded ideas. And once someone brings it up, others will start engaging and will start, of course, there'll be some pushback, some challenges, some arguments, but that is what diversity of society looks like. And that is the conversation we want to see. And oftentimes, I think in a lot of the development spaces, we're too scared to create that space for conversation because we don't want to see the argument. We'd rather just see, oh yeah, everyone just agrees and okay, these are the easy points of agreement. So let's just settle those and move on. But I think that space of holding conflict, of allowing conflict to happen, is the space to push. Like, you have to create a space, a safe enough space where conflict can happen, where arguments can happen, and then allow that to kind of run its own course into a space of agreement. And I think for Bonhishikha, that is really what we try to do, regardless of whether it's a lobby space or planning a protest space or, doing a training or a workshop with a small group of people. The real intention is to allow conflict to have its own way organically within the group, and then even if you come to decide to disagree, that is still worth it. It's worth it to have that conflict happen and the discussion happen and the different points of view come out. On that note, I will pass it on to Samina. to talk a bit about herself and, the movement space in Bangladesh, the social, current cultural context of Bangladesh.
Oh, Samina, before you start, maybe let's gather the staff from both our team and just say hi to each other so we can have a more engaged conversation rather than Samina probably will get bored talking by herself. Dian Dian, do you want to start first? And then we'll go to Tori.
Hi, it's so inspiring hearing you sharing the your journey and the challenges and thoughts. Yeah, and I also share something which is a little bit relative in the chat, which is how the performance and organizing
You want to
around
in
it.
introduce yourself first,
Oh,
Dian
oh,
Dian.
okay, sure. Yeah. My name is Yan Dian. I use they, she pronouns. I've been working for lesbian and feminist activism since 2009. Firstly in Beijing, China, then I moved to Hong Kong, but my organizing is basically still around China, but we were also organizing diaspora Chinese groups in Taiwan, China, Hong Kong, diaspora Chinese speaking areas. Then I came to the US to do a women gender studies PhD, and now I work in a labor rights group which focus on the immigrants, like Asian immigrants, women's rights in the US, especially those who are working in the massage and sex work industry. So I also I'm also a communications manager in Up Women, so it's a really nice chance to talk to you here. Yeah, that's it.
Thank you, Dian Dian. Tori, you want to introduce yourself too?
Yeah, sure. Hi, I'm Tori, and I'm currently a PhD candidate at the University of British Columbia, and studying sociology. And my academic interest is on like gender sexuality. So this is highly relevant to both what I study and what I personally really practice outside of academia. So yeah, it's been such an honor to be able to hear the insights of feminist organization efforts and also the kind of the transnational lens that you shared. I also study migration, by the way, so that's how I really got interested in the topic. And in Up Women, I and Yuxin, we are hosting this bi-weekly gender and sexuality studies seminar, and we bring together audience from diverse backgrounds to read some seminal texts in gender and sexuality theories, and then we will have a discussion. So that's basically what I'm mostly involved in Up Women.
Thank you, Tori. Finally, Carlin.
Hi, nice to see you again, Tasaffy. I'm Carlin. I just graduated from Stanford with double degrees on gender studies and economics for my bachelor's and public policy for my master's. I've been working in feminist and LGBTQ movement since middle school, and I'm very much still a learning phase, and it's really an honor, and I'm really excited to hear about your stories. I've been frantically taking notes on my other screen because I think you've raised so many interesting points, whether it is how social media is challenging how girls in Bangladesh are not getting enough space or privilege as the boys, or talk about how the way they walk, the way they speak or move is specific to Bangladeshi girls and what is considered Bangladeshi enough for a woman, and talking about sustaining and creating space for conflicts. That's something that we as an organization have to learn as well. So I think we also have a cohort of really amazing questions raised by our members. So I'm just really, really excited to hear more about what you've done, what you think.
Thank you, Carlin. And from Bonhishikha, we have also Samina and Anika. So maybe both of you can.
Since Samina is going to go on, I'm just going to quickly introduce myself and then maybe somebody can introduce herself. I'm Anika. I've been with Bonhishikha. When was the first flash mob for 1 Billion Rising? 2012? I think.
2012, 2013.
Yeah. So since then, currently I'm looking after Bonhishikha's content.
Thank you. Now, Samina, if you want to quickly introduce yourself, and we can leave the forum to our audience if anyone volunteers to, there's no pressure there. But if anyone volunteers also want to introduce yourself, please. And Samina, you can.
Hi everyone. So I'm Samina. I am with Bonhishikha at the moment, as Tasaffy mentioned. I started off as a volunteer. No, as an audience, to be honest. And while she was telling the story, I just realized that I have known Bonhishikha for 10 years out of the 15 years of its lifetime. So I think I'll tell my story after the introduction part is done. So yes, please go ahead and then I can come back.
Amazing. Thank you. Okay, we're gonna leave some time. If anyone is interested, please feel free. If not, we can move on. Feel free to also type in chat if you. Yes, Shan, do you want to?
Yeah, first of all, big fan of all of your work. It's amazing, fantastic. I want to introduce myself. My name is Shanshan, and I use she, her pronouns. And I'm a current PhD candidate in University of Arizona, and hopefully I can graduate next year. And my research is basically focused on really similar with your like where you land your artwork work at is basically Chinese queer college student activism. I use the quote unquote activism is because like in my research, my primary goal is to redefine what does activism mean in another land. It's not where, so basically my work is focused on decolonize activism. So, and maybe like I'm really like I've been taking notes for what you've been talking about. It just fascinating, and yeah, I'm already like oh my God, speechless. I'm already a big fan of your work. So I guess the other part is I'm really interested to learn how do you make your feminism travel and how do you land your feminism? Basically, it's like how do you translate your concept to the community who are interested in. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you, Shan. We'll take notes and we'll get to that. If nobody else, then Samina is all.
Okay, thank you. Well, it's a bit humbling to see a lot of PhD and research students being present here. I don't think any of us within the Bonhishikha space has reached that PhD level yet, but we do researches for different organizations, and we do team up with doctors, like people who have these PhD degrees and whatnot. But it's humbling. It's humbling to see like all of you who have been doing research already and these interesting spaces that you are working in and studying in and be interested in the feminism landscape of Bangladesh. I mean, feminism at a broad sense, it is a transnational issue. It is not a country specific issue. And as I was listening to Tasaffy's story, I just not sort of realized just at this moment, but also sort of came as a reflection that how both of our journeys were quite different growing up. But then at the end of this whole journey, we are at the same space now and sharing the same goals and objectives. And I'm sure Anika and the rest of our team members would say the same as well. So I'm sort of the first woman in my entire family, both from my father's and mother's side, who went to university, and not just university within the country, also university in UK. So I didn't grow up seeing women being empowered or women educated or having sort of that enlightenment or awareness to um, talk about their choices or even guide me through what I want it to be. So the word that Tasaffy mentioned is beadob, that means disobedient, literally, but it's often used for young girls and women, even older women, if they don't listen to men particularly. So, but interestingly, coming from a very low middle class family, like very like my father's generation was like really a struggling family who were like they had to live from hand to mouth. So that was the struggle. And their fight was for survival, not for education and rights and other basic amenities. And that struggle led my father to complete his education and then pursue like better job, better life for his own family, which led me to have access to this world outside my family and my social community and my immediate family members. And that's when growing up at a very young age, I realized like traveling across different countries because of my father's job and stuff that, well, things are different at my home. It wasn't based on gender roles. It was sort of how my mother dressed or the other women dressed, how they spoke, what were their roles at home, versus how my classmates or my neighbors or my other family, sort of the family members of my classmates, they had those different sort of dynamic. And having access to this unknown vast world suddenly coming from Dhaka, Bangladesh, I was like, okay, um, if my friend can do this or say this, why can't I? So that's when I started questioning. And interestingly, it wasn't my father or my brothers. It was my mother who was telling me that you are a biadob because young girls don't talk like that. If you talk like that at this age, then when you grow up, you will be um, a disobedient person at your in-laws' place in the society, wherever you go, because that's what she was taught growing up, right? And she tried to cascade her learning, her education to be a good woman to her only daughter that she has tried to raise according to the ideals of a woman in Bangladesh. And henceforth, I was initially called a black sheep who doesn't fit in. And then in my teenage year, like later in my teenage years, I was called the rebel who doesn't listen, who does whatever she wants to do. And then and also the interesting thing is I didn't have sort of when I came back to Bangladesh permanently in 1995, and then when I was like meeting girls of my age from my school or my community, I didn't find girls of my age sharing the same ethos or beliefs that I was questioning or I was thinking. And then I thought, oh, I'm the odd one out. So where do I belong? So this sense of belonging pushed me to find if I am the outcast or if I am in the right path of asking. And yes, pre-Google era, no Google. So I started reading books for the first time, and I got introduced to um, local community libraries and whatnot. And then initially it was fiction and biographies of Bangladeshi literary people, mostly men, poets, novelists, and everything. And then I was like, where are the women? So I couldn't find women in local libraries. And I didn't know there were like big national libraries and whatnot. So I was like, okay, fine. And then I stumbled on, then I was searching for like women writers. Okay, fine. If I don't find women's biographies, then I should find women writers. And then going through those sort of things, there was this one writer's book that was like, the writer was notorious, a female writer. Often people know her. I mean, she is controversial in so many ways, but also she introduced the word feminist, like Naribadi, to mass people. It has its negative connotations. She's called Toslima Nasrin, currently exiled, not currently, has been exiled from the country for a long time. So I stumbled on her book, and at the same time, also there was news in national media like how she has been degrading overall the idea of feminism, overall the idea of the gender roles of women and the society, and challenging religion and state and so on and so forth. And I was like, okay, who is this lady? Let me have a reader. And then I couldn't find her book in the local libraries because that's not nice. Those are not nice books. Women shouldn't read about it, because she was talking about desire, women's sexuality, and how women should be able to do the things that men can do, and like smoking publicly or like shaming men and all of those things. So that's also my first introduction to the word feminist in Bangla, like properly introduction, like, oh, okay, so being a feminist is bad. And then when I spoke to my peers at that age of like 15, 16, 17 years old, they were like, oh, no, 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 nobody wants to be feminist because that's bad. That's morally bad. That will corrupt your character. I'm like, okay, sure. I'm not a feminist, but I'm a rebel and I accept it. And so my life continued with so many questions, the sense of not belonging anywhere. And then I started my work. I wanted to work in the development. I wanted to do something for the people I see on the streets. I didn't have much knowledge or career like guidance from university or anything. So that's something I thought like, okay, fine, let me try it out. And then uh, that's when also I came across like some of the gender programs that's been done through these NGOs. And I was like, okay, they talk about women empowerment. They also talk about these things. And also they bring in people who sort of openly talk about feminist ideas, and they identify themselves as feminist. So I don't think this is that bad of a word to identify as feminist, or feminism is bad, but I was still not confident enough. And then back around in 2015, some of my colleagues were like, hey, we're going to watch this show. It's by a small theater group called Bonhishikha. It's happening here. Do you want to come? And I was like, oh, okay, I don't know. Not much of a fan of like going to theaters, not that like artsy sort of person. But then my friends were going, some of them were performing, like my colleagues come friends. And I'm like, okay, sure. Oh, I have to buy a ticket. Oh no. Okay, fine. It's a reasonable price. So I bought the ticket. I went to the show. And believe me not, that was the first time I heard a lot of things that I had questions about, that I was afraid to ask people, even my closest friends. And the whole auditorium was like dark when the performance was going on. And at the end, when the lights came up, the moderator came on the stage to have a Q&A. I was in tears, as well as people sitting beside me was in tears. And that's when I was like, oh no, I want to know more about them. I want to like engage in this conversation, because this is the first time I felt seen, I felt heard, even though I wasn't there, not speaking, nothing. So after that, I started following Bonhishikha socials, and then I also attended the next year's, like I went as an audience for the next year's show, and by that time they had this call for volunteers. And that's when I'm like very nervous, very shaky, but I signed up. And then I joined their auditioning process and then joined the theater performance in 2017. And I was still in my full-time job, in my full-time family life and duties and roles. But it wasn't just the part when I was doing the theater shows. It was the times before and after that, when we were doing this conversation, developing the scripts, doing the rehearsals and all of those space, mostly at Tasaffy's house, because we didn't have a office or any other space to like rent. Or that overnight I was like, yes, I can say these words. I can talk about desires. I can talk about sexuality, or how I view feminism. So, but at that point, it was a lot of like consuming all of those courage and brave and safe space and all of those things. And yeah, then now I'm sort of an integral part of Bonhishikha. And when the time came that I wanted to step down from a full-time job and get involved in this full-time activism work. That's when Bonhishikha also sort of registered, had his own programs and activities coming up, and needed more of like people investing more time commitment. So that's when I also sort of like thought, okay, I have a lot to learn. I haven't worked in gender area at all. My total expertise for the last 18 years was purely in communication. So I think that's something I can learn from my Bonhishikha team, and I did that. And eventually I was like, oh my God, I'm learning through conversations, dialogues, and works, but also I want to understand the theory better. And then I went for my second master's to understand the connection between gender and media. And that was another enlightening experience. So that's how my journey towards this feminism and activism came up, or sort of like came together. And I'm happy to say for the last 5 or 6 years, I can boldly say I'm a feminist, which I was ashamed or like hesitant about before, saying that I'm a feminist. Oh, how will people think me or think of me? Or like, and then now I'm like, if you don't agree with me, it's your problem, but like I am a feminist, that is my identity, and I uphold my identity. So that's sort of how my journey was, and now we are here. And now like I'm being introduced to more feminist and feminist spaces, like Up Women team here I'm seeing, and also through my master's abroad, and also through the work that we have been doing for the last 5 years. So at the moment, I look after the portfolio. So again, when we try to like give this whole Bonhishikha cohort or platform organizational look, so we had to register it, and then also over the time we had to define our portfolios, like who's managing what, who's doing what, not everyone doing everything. So now my portfolio is strengthening movements and leadership, and sort of I look after programs that engage more of like young feminists from across the country, specifically focusing on community-based or volunteer-based small organizations who are left out from the national or the larger feminist or activism space, and sort of giving them the tools and resources to develop their feminist leadership, and also sort of bringing the network and connection with the larger movement space. So that's sort of a key work that I have been doing in partnership with so many national, international, and local organizations and community-based bodies. And then also there has been another like work in terms of doing intergenerational dialogue and conversation, because the journey of feminism in Bangladesh is not new. It was there even before the independence of the country. And since then, our foremothers had led the path for us. And that's why we have the courage and the privilege and the freedom to like sit and talk about it openly at the moment, even though the country doesn't want us to speak out. So, but there has been always this sort of invisible divide between this older generation and the younger generation, and the different isms of feminism. So some are perceived as very radical, some are perceived as very advocacy focused, some even don't want to call themselves as a feminist organization, just a women rights organization. So all of these different things, and then there are other identity based activism as well. So this is where the intersectionality comes in, and as a whole from Bonhishikha, our stand is for to promote and bring together the intersectionality within the feminism space, rather than having sort of like how NGOs work, like project-based or organizational goal-based. So overall, our organizational goal is to like raise awareness about the gendered issues, the gendered ideas, gender-based violence. So if you think about all of those things from a broader lens, these encompasses all of these isms together, right? It's not just a certain stream specific activism. So that's where we stand at, and that's what we're trying to sort of bring together in the space. So that's also sort of motivated us to do this intersectional engagement, bringing in this older generation of feminist activists and this younger generation and the youngest, like the Gen Z and the Gen Alpha, who are coming into this space. Some may call them like bringing in new thoughts or much more radical than the previous generation, but also they come up with new ideas, new views to the whole idea of feminism. And even like what Shanshan said, that like decolonizing the word activism, a lot of us, as we sort of trying to unlearn gender in so many ways, we are also trying to decolonize a lot of the social ideas. And even the words that dictates our life and our choices and our work that we do. So all of these things, like bringing in this conversation, is going on within this intersectional and intergenerational space. So that's sort of how and what we are doing through Bonhishikha from this portfolio. But then there is another major portfolio that is looked after by Anika, that is around climate. How climate and gender are sort of an very integrated thing and not two different things, and why climate is a feminist issue. So bringing that into the main conversation. I think if Anika can chime in to talk more about that, that would be good. But these are some of the major portfolios that's there. And besides that, what we do is host a lot of learning sessions. We engage in workshops, capacity building, trainings on gender transformative program approach, doing researches, like sort of from a feminist viewpoint, and understanding where the sexual and gender-based violence lies, why certain social norms are there, why these different identities and different sort of activism not often sort of synchronized, but has this tension going on there. So a lot of things going on. It's sometimes overwhelming, but also interesting as we learn and grow and engage more. So I think that's where I can stop, and then we can move on to the next chapter.
Nice. Let me bring Tasaffy back, and so both of you are highlighted now. Great. Now, since we have prepared this list of questions, I guess maybe if you can walk us through what is your day-to-day like, that will give us a more immersive experience as full-time NGO workers in Bangladesh. And how do you reach out to those communities? And what do you do when you wake up every day facing the crazy traffic that is going on in Dhaka? Just give us an overview.
I don't call myself a full-time worker. I stopped being a full-time worker in 2015 when I decided to move into consultancy. And a big reason for me to want to move into consultancy at that point was because I knew I wanted to engage more in thinking about what we could do with Bonhishikha. So that was also the time we sort of started launching our own productions, where we would do the groundwork of finding stories, doing research, or doing like crowdsourcing of stories to create the pieces for It's a She Thing. 2015 is when we started It's a She Thing. And then every year we would sort of engage in having these new groups come together, kind of identify specific issues that we wanted to highlight and talk about, and then kind of do our own gathering of stories and experiences on those issues. And we've used like social media platform to collect them. We've gone to organizations who specifically work on that topic and kind of ask for case studies, researches, anything that might give us an idea of specific information about how women at the focus was specifically on women's groups at that point, how they're dealing with these topics, these issues, how they're experiencing it. So I think it's been 10 years where I have not been a full-time job holder. with a little gap in between where I did do a full-time stint for 2 years. But the intention was that I would have time to invest in some of these things, which I enjoyed at that moment. It was completely voluntary at that time. I think 2025 is probably the first year I would say where I am earning from Bonhishikha as my main source of as my main source of income. Up until this point, it's always been something that I was either not earning from at all or was like a minimum part of my income coming from this space. And I think that was important. I think I have this conversation with a lot of young organizations coming up and setting themselves up. And they, a lot of times, one of the first things organizations do is look for funding to do the work. And I think that shifts your motivation and it shifts how you can grow. Like, I think we had a lot of time to kind of just focus on what we wanted to do. Because as soon as there's funding and reporting and setup, then a lot of time and effort goes into actually, a lot of this administrative work. And it kind of diverts that joy also in a way. Like, I think activism should give you joy. I think that is something that's important to me, at least, that it should make me feel like I am being able to do something that I really want to do. And I think that was also one of the things that we spoke about, that, like, what is something that keeps us going forward? And I think that is one of those things, like, it should motivate you. Activism should make you feel like there's more to be done, and what am I doing and how am I doing it? And it should both challenge me, but also make me feel joy by doing it. Otherwise, we wouldn't want to do it. Otherwise, and it's so depressing in so many ways. Like, if that part of activism does not make you feel like it's something good you're feeling about it, even with all the challenges and all the difficulty, then I think it's difficult to keep on going. So I don't call myself a full-time worker. I work from home a lot of times. Even now, with Bonhishikha office space, I would say 2 to 3 days a week I put into the office. A lot of times I think I work in my own timeline, so I like to set that interaction and engagement with also the team in a way that, they get to do their work in their own time. And then as long as we have deadlines, fixing specific times where we can sit together, work on it, or that something is drafted, and then I put aside time to look into it. In Dhaka, it's funny that you mentioned traffic, because I always say, I think one of the, a lot of people always complain about the traffic, and it is a major issue. And every time I have to, like last week, I think I had to go out almost every day. And there was one day I spent 2 hours in traffic. Actually 2 days, right? Also on last Thursday, I did this. I always say, like, I think one of the big reasons and the privilege of me enjoying Dhaka, is because I don't have to step out into traffic every day. I think that would have driven me crazy if I had to do that all the time. Also, like, where we're based, located, a lot of workspaces in the development sector are not that far away. So I also walk if I can. And Dhaka streets, it's not something that that it's like comfortable because of crowds, not good footpaths to, kind of, you're always like crisscrossing and jumping off the traffic in a lot of the areas that you have to walk in. So I think, but I am someone who enjoys walking. So I take that as one of the things to kind of, that also gives me joy. Like, even if I have to like have that angry face on sometimes when I'm walking through crowds, it still gives me like an accomplishment at the end of that. Yeah.
Thank you for your thorough answer. So since we're already 1 hour in, let's cut straight to what I guess a lot of our audience is really interested in. That is the intersectionality, as you at the beginning mentioned, like you have to deal with poverty, class struggles, and sometimes language barriers, and sometimes harassment from other groups. Or how did you even navigate? And at the beginning, you mentioned you collaborate with men group in certain activities. So how do you navigate all these different potential clashes of value in such a diverse landscape in Dhaka?
I think Shan's question was also kind of similar in terms of how we take feminism to different spaces. I think it also matters like how we define and build up feminism. Like Samina mentioned, we have had conversations around feminism, anti-feminism, and all of that. I think for me, like when I try to talk about feminism, I really like to open up the conversation about what does feminism mean, because it can also mean different things to different people. Even within the feminist space, I think there's also a lot of arguments about what we intend, what we want. You know, there's conversations about whether wearing the hijab is feminist or not, and topics like that. And I think for me specifically, personally, I can speak from how I envision or engage in conversation around feminism is really about choice and everything that allows one to have choice. So that is, you know, education, access to education, it's access to knowing what different opportunities you can have. It's ensuring that there's justice and legal systems to ensure justice. And then all of that should allow one person to be able to make the choice that they see best fit for themselves. And it can very well be a choice that I do not align with. But as long as that person is capable of making that choice with all the options in front of them, knowing that there are no repercussions if you do or do not make that choice, I think that to me is feminism, to be able to ensure that space and that ability of oneself to know that you can make that choice. So regardless of where we go into talking about these issues, I think one of the things that we use a lot, especially when we are talking to different organizations, different groups, especially groups which come from different levels of privilege, is talk about privilege and power. Because I think that is the core of what makes feminism be able to question how I live in a certain space, but also how I create or hold that space for someone else. So regardless of who we're talking to, where we're talking to, I think we use that as a way of being able to reflect on the self and be able to kind of reflect on different dynamics. We don't usually go into different groups and just go straight into like, oh, feminism means this is how it should be, this is how it should not be. It's really about being able to open that area to be able to question, oh, how is this working? How does that affect me? And not just affect in terms of, oh, how is this challenging me? But does that make me think of certain things in a certain way? Does this make me think that, oh, I am good and that is bad? If someone else is doing something like this, how do I feel about it? Why do I feel that way about it? You know, who defines good and bad is actually the essence of the question, right? So regardless of who we're talking to and where we are, those are kind of more the discussions we have. And we've had these discussions with like university, but I also have done researches with school-age children to try and understand how they're looking at gendering, what affects gendering for them. So, does it affect a certain way how they're aspiring to be something? How do they look at their siblings? How do they look at other girls and boys in their neighborhood? And it's always interesting because, gendering is such a core part of our lives. Like, there's no way we don't face it or see it. But we don't often actually think about what that means for us. And for us, when we say unlearn gender, we always go into spaces and we go, however you think about gender, it is something you've learned. Nobody sat you down in a classroom and gave you a textbook about it, but you've learned it. And so if we are trying to talk about feminism, it is just about unlearning all of those things that we have taken for granted and starting from the part of who defined it and do I agree with it? Do I, from my core, agree with it? Am I someone who follows this prescribed method, all the way? And I think that is something that a lot of times in feminist spaces, I think this was also a question that Yuxin brought to us, where does queer feminism align with how we are looking at it? And I told this to Yuxin then as well, honestly, when we started and when we thought unlearn gender is going to be the way we go, queer feminism was not a big topic of conversation. So we did not think of it from that perspective, but we did think of it that, our whole intention is to talk about what is defined as the norm, and are you able to choose anything that is not the norm? Do you want to choose something that is not the norm? Have you asked that question to yourself? And as we really went into those conversations, whether it was the theater, whether it was the workshops, the end of the day, even now when we go and talk about, gender identities and expression in different places, that is always the question we ask, okay, what is the socially prescribed way of defining a man and a woman? And then can you ask yourself, do you fit into that? And there's almost never anyone a man or a woman, who would be like, I completely fit into that prescribed notion. Everybody will find something or the other that they don't align with. And we just want to leave them with that question. So if you are not aligning with it, someone else might align farther away from that line. So if you're holding space for yourself, can you hold space for someone else to be even more different than what you consider different for yourself? And that to us is the feminism we want people to think of, that I can choose to be what I choose to be. Nobody ever prescribes to the social norm, whether they want to admit it or say it out loud. If they really ask themselves the question, they will see that they don't fit into it. And if you can hold that space for yourself, can you hold a bigger space for someone else who diverges further from whatever the norm is?
That's a very thorough answer. I think I also wanted to double click on what Shanshan brought up earlier on the problem of translation. Maybe Shanshan means more of a conceptual translation. How about the literal translation? When you received this type of education from the Western countries, and then the local majority probably speak Bangla, how do you usually make sure that the message is conveyed to serve your purpose or your agenda as?
I can take that. So basically, our entire education system in Bangladesh has both Bangla and English as mandatory subjects from the get-go, from kindergarten. So it's not something to do with Tasaffy and I having the privilege to go abroad and get education, because we went abroad in our later age, like in our undergrad or masters. But within the built-in curriculum system, it's Bangla and English is mandatory. And then we have science and humanities and arts and commerce and business and all of those. That comes later when you are at the 9th grade. So in terms of communication, again, this has a lot to do with colonization, right? So we were colonized by British for like over 200 years as an India subcontinent. And before that, there were like Europeans. So even within like there was this interesting thing Tasaffy said that she doesn't look Bangladeshi. Also, there's this her expression or body language is there, but also like you can't define Bangladeshi by looks in general, because it's Bangladesh is a country full of like multiple racial and ethnic mixture. And all of those happened because of its geographical position. It is it sort of used and was and is still used as a sort of a port country. So a lot of this during the 15th, 16th century, and then 17th and 18th, all of these European merchants came in and they settled in different parts of India, Pakistan, and Bangladesh. And a lot of these trades happened in the Bay of Bengal. So like Dhaka and the older town of Dhaka, it still has all of those colonial architecture and culture and a lot of mixture of people. So not all of us has this sort of similar look, or like we also don't have the similar language. So it's sort of Bangladeshi's identities are sort of like the identities of women in general, not monolithic. So there is this mixture there. And in terms of language as well, because of the like longest time of colonization by British, English, a lot of English words came into a mainstream spoken language as well. So mixing Bangla and English in our day-to-day life, even within people who couldn't go to school at all. So they don't use particular Bangla words for those words because the words has gotten inbuilt in the main language. So that's sort of not a problem in general. However, um, if you think about fluency, like spoken English and fluency, yes, that has a lot to do about whoever takes the language seriously and practices in their day-to-day life. For example, I do not come from 100% English medium school, even though we have different English medium schools, either like following different international curriculums, like American curriculum, British curriculum, Australian curriculum there. So students coming out from those schools have those country-specific accents. And then people like me who do not come from any specific English medium schools, like the accent I have is the like sort of, we call it Bangladeshi accent. But in terms of translating or communicating with the communities, we do use local language, Bangla, generally. But then again, Bangla is not everyone's mother tongue. So the indigenous communities, they don't speak Bangla. They learn Bangla when they go to school. So that's also sort of, but then again, because Bangla is the sort of most commonly used language across all the different dialects and regions within Bangladesh, so everyone sort of tries to understand and learn that, either going through education institutions or not. But then connecting with the communities also helps if we use local dialects, if some of us can pick it up. So even for like local engagements, for example, if we have field assistants or research assistants, sometimes we sort of take those sort of colleagues with us. If we feel like it will be helpful, much more helpful to have someone from those communities to communicate openly and freely, because I might be considered as an outsider coming with so much privilege and not being able to understand. So these are perceptions that you cannot change overnight. So people might think, oh, okay, urban Dhaka born bred girls won't understand my struggle. So that's also where you like how you give that space rather than sort of dictating the narratives and then having more questions coming in and also having locals with you. So that
I
has been
see.
quite a challenge.
So it seems like both of you have experienced both the Western side and some local Bangladeshi feminist side. So what would you characterize as Bangladesh specific characteristic of feminists or feminism movement?
Tasaffy, you go ahead.
I don't think I could specify one thing because I think the feminist movement space is also very broad and diverse in that sense. We have, as Samina mentioned, like pre-Bangladesh times feminism happening, which focuses on specific areas. So, if we go by the waves of feminism that they say, from the USA side, I always say we don't follow those waves. But we do have our own kind of waves in terms of what has been a focus of the movement at certain points. But also in a way, I think in Bangladesh, it has never been like, one way focusing on one thing and then the next way focuses on another thing and sort of like you've achieved something in the first and then move on to the second. It's not like that. I would say it's different things that become the focus of the movement at certain points in time. But all of it, like whether we talk about economic empowerment, whether we talk about domestic violence and, specifically focusing around violence has been part of it. Focusing in around workers' rights, sex workers' rights at a certain point was a big part of it. But all of these things are still part of it because none of this work has been completed and like 100% achievement gotten from any of it, right? Like there's still work around economic empowerment. There's, you have to still talk about women becoming more aware about their financial rights. We are still talking about inheritance rights for women because our private laws are religion-based. So all the different religions follow their own separate inheritance laws. Which is none of them are equal between men and women. So, there's been different focus, right? I think currently right now, there's a big focus around political rights and political representation of women. Some of you may know we had a uprising happen just about a year ago, which shifted the government, who was in power for 15 years at that point. And they had a very stringent position on religious groups and them not being able to be as vocal in many ways. Does not mean they did not patronize them. They were doing some different kinds of patronizing with them to ensure that they still had a lot of grassroots engagement and a lot of evolution at the grassroots level, just not being very vocal and visible at the national level. But now we are seeing these groups being very vocal, very forward with a lot of their agenda, a lot of their demands. Unfortunately, even though it was a public-led uprising, especially by young men and women playing a huge role during last July when the protests were happening on the streets and have just been sidelined completely. Like the first day after the previous government fell, when the new government planning started, it was only men in a closed room making decisions of who comes in and who gets to be part of the interim government, all of that. And you knew instantly that it's going to shift because you have a bunch of men sitting in a room and no transparency, no conversation, no asking people for opinions. And that's been the state for the last year or so. So right now there is a big push in the feminist movement to talk about political rights, to talk about, we are talking about reforms and we're talking about shifting things before the next election happens. But there's so much insecurity around women. There's a lot of mob violence happening where, public shaming, there's a lot of online shaming, doxing happening targeted towards vocal women, especially women who are coming into political spaces. A lot of young women are coming into political spaces and being vocal. And at the same time, you see the backlash being just as much bigger, why kind of to push them back and push them out. So, like I think that has always been there, the where shifts happen. So right now within the whole feminist movement, regardless of age, regardless of which area of Bangladesh you're based in, regardless of what issues you specifically focus on from your organization, everyone is kind of, engaging and talking about, okay, how can we keep on pushing this agenda? Because it's a priority at this moment. It's a time where we see that if we keep on pushing this, there might be something to come out of it. And we know it's not going to be the end of it. Like maybe we get certain things in the reform happening with the election, but as soon as election planning comes, it is also going to shift. There's going to be more violence we're expecting. There's going to be more pushback. Any women who possibly run as candidates from different positions will probably face a lot more like online harassment, bullying, and things like that. So it's like, yeah, I think basically, what I'm trying to say is like the feminist movement is not one thing, but there has been moments like this where it all comes together because there is a focus, there is a priority. And just to
Wow.
add to that, I think one of the questions was with younger feminists, we see more radical ways of engaging. So on May 16th this year, we actually had a big feminist gathering. It was one, I'll send some videos or pictures afterwards to you see, and you can share with others. There was this, basically we had, since the uprising, there's been little small commissions working on specific issues, with recommendations of reforms that the current government and the next government should really take into consideration. And there was a women's reform commission. So a lot of these issues from the broader feminist movement, from different topics, different areas, were kind of collected together and submitted as demands of what kind of reforms they should be considering. And of course, inheritance rights was part of it. Sex workers' rights as workers, recognition as workers were part of it. I'm just mentioning the ones which caused a big stir within the broader community. And then marital rape being recognized, because we don't have marital rape in our what do you call it, in our laws,
Legal system.
and in our legal system. So so these are some of the three things that were really picked up by religious groups, by men's groups, by women's groups also, who identify more with the religious values, and saying that a lot of these things are pushing tradition out, are going to ruin women, are going to ruin our families. I think, very similar narratives that you hear also in the West right now from the anti-rights, anti-feminist movement space. So in kind of a reaction to that was this huge gathering we had on May 13th, May 16th. And that was the broader feminist space and the women's rights space and diverse minority groups which came together to be part of that gathering. This was like indigenous communities were part of it, tea workers, garments workers, a lot of the socialist groups were also part of it, the bigger women's rights areas, the smaller queers groups also who were part of the feminist space. Everybody kind of came together with the intention that, oh, this is a show of the strength and the intention to show that, we are not a minority. When we are so many minorities and we come together, we are probably a much bigger majority than the groups that claim to be the majorities. So yeah.
Nice. Since this question was raised by Shou, and also Shanshan's question was also answered, I'm just gonna pause here to see if any of you wanted to reply to what was just. And Dian Dian can probably raise the next question. I know Dian Dian had some question regarding the Western influence and the so-called stereotypical Muslim woman. Dian Dian, do you want to add to?
Oh, yeah, I guess it's just we have many shared situation that on one hand, like I don't know, like many of these, how to say that, like many of these things comes from a colonial history. Although China is not officially colonized, but there's still that very strong tension between like our own way, our culture versus the Western influences. And now feminism usually accused by those men who like under the traditional the traditional culture as like you are influenced by the bad Western like ideas, something like that, right? But on the other hand, actually, like we are like, yeah, just it's also very difficult to sometimes when we are like having this transnational conversation with Western feminists, sometimes they kind of have some stereotype of how like Asian women would be or how a Muslim woman would be. So I'm wondering how you deal with that tension and yeah.
I can take that. So I personally have a lot of problem when people say influenced by Western idea or Western agenda or Western culture. I mean, in this time of globalization and access to information and visual data and YouTube, Google, movies, everything. I mean, who is not influenced by Western anything? Even the clothes we wear, right? Like I'm not wearing my traditional clothes. You are not wearing what used to be your traditional clothes. And we are all adopting a different language that is not our own, right? So whether a country is colonized by England or France or US or whatever, like English has sort of got its status as the international singular language. So is our life, mostly dominated by media, movies, TV series. We all watch Netflix, we all watch Amazon and Apple TV and whatnot. So, and also to understand that, like even food choices. I love sushi, but none of my family members have ever seen sushi before, right? Because first we got introduced through TV and then we got introduced through travel, right? So, I mean, everything is a sort of like transcended beyond boundaries. But I find that these are some of the keywords that fundamentalists and anti-rights are pinning on specific cultural or region-based people to not take their right-based work forward. So, for example, even within the Western context, even within USA, if you look at the whole political landscape there, I mean, the rise of anti-rights group, they don't have Islamist fundamentalists, but they have Christian fundamentalists. They have this family-based rights group who wants to take away women's bodily autonomy, who wants to ban abortions, who wants to take health rights, accessing health services for women and marginalized communities, right? But nobody is coming towards them or attacking them saying that where are you bringing this agenda from? Is this an Oriental agenda? Is this an Asian agenda? Because when they when the global north or the Western countries talk about progressiveness, they bring out themselves as the sort of the upholder or the leaders of progressiveness. And we, the Asians, Central or South or Asia Pacific, we are always considered as the backwards one, right? We have always been. And their narrative for colonizing for years and years, and even till today through trade and commerce and business, is that these are the people, like even for the indigenous, these are the people who are not civilized. So we need to go and civilize them. So while doing that, at one point, they sort of diminished and destroyed our own heritage and culture. I mean, if you think about the Indian subcontinent or Bangladeshi culture, specifically clothing, just one example, women did not had blouses or like full covering clothing. It was just one long piece of sari that didn't need stitching because the whole weaving process that involved was just of making longer threads and binding them together as a long piece of cloth. So women and men would tie that long piece of cloth around their waist until their knee, or like around their knee length, and women would cover that, like wrap that whole long cloth around their body. And there was no social shame attached to that, like, oh, your tummy is showing, or you're showing more skin on your back or your hand or on your shoulder, right? I even I'm not from that ancient age, but I grew up seeing one of my grandmothers who never chose to wear a blouse. She would wear in her later years, because she was too old and fragile. Sometimes her that long piece of cloth would move and her breast would come out. And I that was shocking for me, because of the culture I was brought up. I was like, oh my God, like her breasts are showing. And my mother was like, but that's normal. Go to the village. It's normal. And I have never heard my grandmother or my grandmother's similar age of relatives saying that they were harassed for their boobs being shown or being revealed, not like explicitly shown. It's just like how you wear clothes and then while you were working, it might have a glimpse of it. But nobody was sexually harassed for all of these things. That was very normal. Women smoking like with those what is it called? Like
Tobacco leaves.
yeah, tobacco leaves, and
Rolled
also
up.
like like pipes, local
The
made pipes.
shisha.
Yeah, shisha and pipes. That was sort of a cultural thing. Like you sit together, you have your evening or afternoon chats, and you smoke. And in today's time and date, uh, women smoking is sort of like a character assassination. So it's not it's so where do you see westernized idea? So these Western people came, they said we are uncivilized. They sort of tried to make us civilized. And now they're doing these uncivilized things in their own country, putting women backwards. And on the other hand, we Asians, Central Asians, and other Asian countries, and the indigenous communities, we had very strong cultural values that has been ripped off from us, right? So, but then again, wearing shirts, trousers, shoes, sneakers is comfortable, it's practical. So we chose the practicality. Some of our feminists in Bangladesh, they still choose to wear our traditional clothes because they want to uphold. So the waves that Tasaffy was mentioning, there were waves about language movement where women led. There were waves of like feminist waves where like women chose to wear Bangladeshi clothes instead of Pakistani clothes during the independence era. And these feminists or these women rights activists are still choosing to wear that long clothes and saris every day and night. But we, in today's day and time, the younger generation or the us, we find it not that practical to run, to chase, to use public transport and whatnot, right? And the next generation, they might find even, I mean, they do find wearing full sleeve clothes suffocating. Even I do, but does it have to do anything with feminism? Why does it? Like your your choice or your right to choose shouldn't be tied to any ism, or it shouldn't be a matter or a state's concern. So the rise of fundamentalists and anti-racist groups across the board, not just Bangladesh, everywhere, whatever they find convenient to pin on women, to shun them, to make them stop and ask for their rights, they just bring it up. In Bangladesh, it's religion-based fundamentalists. In China, it might be something else. In Taiwan, it might be something else. In the US, it's something else. So your religion identity not necessarily should be conflicted with your feminist identity, because that's between you and your God, if you believe in that. And your feminist identity is about believing in equality of everyone. So I think that sort of summarizes. I mean, as I was speaking, I was feeling a lot of rage, but that should summarize how I want to respond to this westernized agenda.
I think Shanshan also brought up an interesting question. Shanshan, do you want to directly address your question?
Oh yeah, so I was asking, so since both of you guys mentioned how you guys connect community together, for example, like go to another different spaces and connect with people. So I guess my question is, you mentioned the way to connect each other with is to find similarities or to talk about similarities about each other. My question is, how do you guys start to talk about this, and how do you acknowledge the differences as well? So I guess and can you give us a example about like what do you do like in a specific activity? Thank you.
I also
Yeah.
wanted to add to that differences, since what Samina also mentioned is a lot of positivity. We see this action happening, and just to add on to Shanshan's the question about the differences. So did you see any specific challenges regarding those differences in agenda and ideologies?
Yeah. So as soon as I saw Shanshan's question in the chat, I was like, I know which activity I will talk about. This was actually an activity I did for a self-reflection activity that came up in an online module I was going through. And when I did it, I really enjoyed it. And every time I've done it a few other times, and it's interesting, like what comes out from doing it. So it's an interesting activity, I find, especially if it's a group of mixed identities, if it's people from different communities in one space. The activity is to take like a minute, and maybe all of you can try it after the session at some point. It's just to take a minute and think about all of your own identities and just list them down. And it can be anything that you consider to be your identity. It can be your, legal identities. It can be your anything that people identify you as. It can be what you identify as yourself. It can be relationships that you have with different people, which is part of your identity. So any of it. And it's an interesting exercise in a group because there's obviously overlapping identities that show up, like, it could be nationality, but it could also be like everybody is someone's child, or there might be parents in the group. There might be different definitions of parents that come up. So it's an interesting way to talk about how you kind of see yourself or how you also perceive others seeing you. But it's also a very good reflection of then taking those identities and thinking about which of those identities have privileges and which of those identities are like underprivileged or, sidelined or socially excluded. And then kind of open the space up to talk about how that feels like for those different identities. One of the reasons we also like doing this with different groups is a big part of our intention of coming together is to get different communities to sort of kind of see that, as minority groups, there's similar kind of challenges that we are facing. And if we kind of can connect and come together on what the roots of those challenges are, then we can probably do more like collective mobilization and advocacy. So it's a very interesting activity, and it's a good way to like start conversations. It makes a very good ice-breaking activity as well, because you get a bit of time to think for yourself, but then it opens up the space for a lot of different conversations to go forward. Just a note on that, connecting to that is, I think, the question about translation and languages. For me personally, I don't use very academic theoretical language in my daily life. Even when I read academic things or work on studies and researches, I find it easier to translate things into a language that I would use in my everyday life. So for me, talking about any of these issues, as I got to learn about a lot of the theories behind things, as feminist theories also expand over time and new theories are coming up. Every time I educate myself, for me, part of the education is being able to transfer theoretical language into everyday language that works for me. So I don't use theoretical or academic language when I am talking about what I think or how I understand something. So for me, going to any groups, I don't use language that is big words and, and sometimes I feel uncomfortable when I'm in spaces where there's a lot of research language being used, and I'm like, I don't know how to relate to it because that's not how I speak. And then I feel I feel a different form of exclusion in a lot of those spaces where I'm like, that's not my language and that's not how I engage in these conversations. I might be talking about those same things, but how I would express it or discuss it would be in very different language. So for me, that is always very important whenever I come across new information, new ideas, to be able to translate it for myself first. And then when I have it in a way that makes sense to me in how I would be able to process it, I am then be able to have that conversation in everyday language with other people.
I see Chris also brought up some questions. Chris, do you want to share and directly address to the speakers?
Hello guys, thank you for sharing. Because recently I was watching the Chinese comedy in China and they're talking about the women's situation. So I want to know if there any stand-up comedy in Bangladesh and women stand up there and talking about women's situation and share their life stories. And another thing, what I'm curious about is the women's abortion. Because in China, it's also happened a lot for women, but in some countries, it's also illegal. So I want to know women's attitude about abortion in Bangladesh. That's what I want to know. Thank you so much.
I'll try to quickly respond to that. First, stand-up comedy is kind of like a new area that is new, meaning like over the last 6-7 years, it's sort of become a popular mechanism overall. Like we didn't have stand-up comedy as such. We've had a lot of like comedy related TV shows and things like that. But stand-up comedy is still kind of like a upcoming area. And some women are moving into that space now. There's quite a lot of young women who are engaging in that. I think a bit of it started through online platforms as well. I think women using online platforms to kind of point out a lot of these social issues and norms by kind of joking about it, making short reels about it, little what do you call it, like dramatized versions of situations to kind of highlight a lot of the issues that happen. Similarly, like sex work is not criminalized in Bangladesh. So the talk does not go into legalizing anything. The advocacy really just focuses on workers' rights. So there's all these kind of, dances that is there also within the feminist space and has been there for a long time, where you kind of choose and pick a battle in a way to ensure that you get to the results that you're trying to get to.
That's it sounds like very strategically, intentionally leave something blurry so it benefits our group. That's so nice. So since we only have 3 minutes left, and I would like both of you to maybe if you want to share some closing reflections and maybe if you have some call for actions for the current generation of feminists and just your vision for the future for Bangladesh and also for global coalition.
Samina, do you want to start?
Yeah, I was just thinking, what should be my call to action? Yeah, as much as I might sound very enthusiastic talking about my experience and whatnot, but overall, the entire experience being an activist in this space for the last couple of years sort of made me a little bit of pessimist. So as I mentioned, that women's movement has come a long way in this country, in Bangladesh, even before the birth of this country, and we have gained so much. We have had so much sort of policy level changes. So much has been implemented. And a lot of things happened, but recently it feels like we're going backwards. And in terms of, I mean, sometimes it feels like this country does not belong to me, or I do not belong to this country. This is for men only, and particularly Muslim, straight, heterosexual men. But that being said, if I stop right there with all my despair and pessimism, then what's the point of being an activist, right? So, I mean, with all of those negativity always holding me back or making me depressed or sad at point, I still believe that there is a lot to do. And even so, I feel like it's not just lot to do, it's more of coming to a common understanding. I think that's missing in the recent time everywhere. I mean, since we're talking about all of these isms and all of this different intersectionality, like um, when we talk about equal rights and access and overall ensuring everyone's citizen rights, equal citizen rights in this country, our individual identity shouldn't come forward. Yes, that is needed. That is also an identity. But whether you are queer, whether you are straight, whether you are a feminist who is radical, or a feminist who is very progressive, or a liberal, or a socialist feminist, whatever label you use, I mean, the end goal should be, it needs to, like, our cumulative drive should ensure that all citizens of this country should have equal rights, equal access to all the basic things, and harmonious coexistence. So that should be something we should push forward, even if there is a lot of disagreements in small pockets, but we should look at the bigger picture. So that is sort of a call to action that I would want to emphasize.
That resonates very deep with us. Also for the global community. Tasaffy, do you want to go there?
I just think, like, it's easy to get bogged down, especially I think in today's world where there's so much information and you instantly get to see all the things that are happening, and how challenging and almost impossible it seems to make a dent in systems, and just how structures are so interconnected to each other. So I think, and that I remember that I had seen this quote somewhere, and it's kept on sticking to my head that, like, if you're challenging something, that itself is optimism, because you don't challenge something unless you're hoping for a change. And all of us, we do hope for a change, whether it is, maybe it's not the big structures, and the big structures are there and we will aim for that and we engage on that. But we know the big structures are not going to change overnight. We say in our spaces whenever we are having these conversations that, yeah, we're not pushing for these agendas because we want to see an equal life in our lifetime. That is not the point. But the point is that we will keep on pushing. We will keep on trying to see that we're not just going to lay back and let things happen, that we have a voice, we have intentions, we have hope, and we will keep on engaging on that. And I think it's important to find the comrades and the partners and, the people who will be with you on this. And I think that was one of the things that really brought us to where we are. It was just about, the theater spaces and the conversations, just looking for that comradeship and that companionship of doing something together. It wasn't about changing the world. It barely was about changing Bangladesh. Although we did, I mean, even if how Samina talks about her experience of coming to our spaces and just realizing that there's others and there's a space to talk about and there's a space to think more for what I want for myself, but also what we want together for younger people that we see around us. We bring these conversations to our families, to our spaces, and we see that shift happening. Like, I can say how I have seen my parents shift from challenging me on certain things to encouraging others to doing those same things later in their ways, in their spaces. And I think, and Annika has asked me this before, like, how do you get motivated? Where do you see change? And like nothing changes. So how do you keep being motivated? And I always tell her, like, you look for the motivation in the small things, like the tiniest win, take the win, enjoy it, be fulfilled by it, feel energized and enthusiastic about it, because the little wins are what matters. And the little win can be one person doing something different, or one person in a workshop walking out and thinking about something that could be different, something that shifted, something that they're questioning, and that's it. Take the little wins, build it up like it's the end of the world, enjoy it, talk about it, tell others that it happened, because the little wins are what will create the big change. And even if we don't see the big change, it doesn't matter. It's what the little shifts that we see around ourselves is what matters. And that is what you take. And yeah, that's it.
Wow, that's such a powerful message to formally conclude today's meeting. So I think we are gonna stop recording since we are at time. And thanks for everyone that attended. And Bonhishikha group, do you want to post your email here? And we can also post later in all of our community group chats. And so we can keep the communication channel open, keep establishing the comradeship that we all absolutely need desperately at this point. So thank you so much for attending, to our guest speaker and also to the audience.